You came up to me like, bro, I improved today more than like, I don't know, in the past week because you were in a low heart rate and you've never been there before.
The B team relied on a new style of hard training as part of their camp for the Craig Jones Invitational and ADCC. And this just might have been one of the secret ingredients to the recent success at both these events. The person behind this training method was their new head coach for this camp, Dima Murovanni. What's really interesting about this style of training, it's not typically what you might think of when you hear the term heart rate training.
Okay, the first match today will be at a high heart rate. Very, very high. Push it. The next match will be medium heart rate.
In this video, we're going to break down exactly what this style of training is all about and exactly how to incorporate this style of training into your own routine so you can help develop your own jiu-jitsu game. And if you don't already know me, my name's Sean. I'm a BJJ black belt and a founder of the BJJ education app, Jiu-Jitsu, which if you wanted to check out, I put a link in the description with some free instructional content. If you're not already familiar with Dima, he's previously most known for being the coach of other athletes, most notably Joseph Chen. And given that Craig Jones was busy focused on launching CJI, and Dima was already going to be at the B team anyway to coach his athletes, he was then given the opportunity to be the head coach for the entire training camp by B team co-founder Seth Belial. We're going to get into exactly what heart rate zones are and how to track your heart rate later on in this video. But honestly, that sort of thing isn't exactly what this training is all about. What's really interesting about this style of heart rate training is that it's focused primarily on skill development. This is opposed to what one might typically think of when they hear heart rate training, where the goal is to develop physical conditioning and cardio. Dima breaks down heart rate into three broad categories. It's low, medium, and high heart rate. Each heart rate serves a particular purpose for developing skills and grappling. The first category, low heart rate, is ideal for when you're trying to develop entirely new skills. To maintain a low heart rate when you're grappling, you can't rely on your physicality. You have to use technical solutions.
Fucking explode into a wrestle up, and like it would usually work, but like I know it's not gonna work, and I know that I have to like control my heart rate, so that's not an option for me to just like fucking face butt into a wrestle up.
If your heart rate is low, you'll make mistakes, problem solve, and learn.
And you can develop good technique except you're in a low heart rate. If you learn something new, you can't learn it without thinking. Imagine I'm telling you learn how to, I don't know, count to 10. You never count to 10. And at the same time, I punch you in your face. You will not think about counting to 10 because your heart rate goes high. So if you want to develop new skills, you have to be in a low heart rate.
So time to think about like, oh, I actually would much rather my foot being here than here.
It's the difference between thinking and reacting.
Yeah.
As you try to use these new skills at this low heart rate, you're really going to suck at them. So you have to be comfortable with the idea of learning to lose.
So you need to stay in a low heart rate if you can't do it at all. And if you lose, it's okay. Joseph said something really wise. You have to learn how to lose. Or you can't learn skills. You will, for all your time, only stick with the skills that you already have or where you're talented.
This can be quite challenging because you have to avoid the temptation to muscle out of things to avoid losing the roll, and the temptation to resort to skills you've already developed. We'll get into this later in this video when we talk about heart rate zones, but for now you can think of low heart rate as a sort of pace you can easily maintain for like 30 minutes straight with no problem. And we're also going to talk about some of the tips the B team recommends to prevent your heart rate from elevating so you can stay in this low heart rate. The next phase up from low heart rate is medium heart rate. You're just using a bit more energy here and it's a bit faster pace. This is the ideal phase for improving existing skills you've already developed, and you can still think clearly enough to make decisions and consciously execute different techniques. It also helps with timing, reaction, and chaining techniques you're already comfortable with at a higher intensity. At medium heart rate, while you're using energy, you're still being sure to be technical, but you might maintain positions after a scramble rather than continuing to move around and wasting a bunch of energy.
And then for me, medium heart rate is competition mode where I would do things more perfectly. Right? Because like you get on top at high heart rate, you get on top of somebody in side control, you're like, all right, fuck it, I'll just cut them and then score again. In medium heart rate, you're like, all right, I'm gonna hold them down. I'm
gonna get my heart rate to medium.
Medium heart rate's the pace you can maintain for a duration of a match, like 5-10 minutes before you need a break to rest and recover. High heart rate is the fastest pace with maximum intensity and uses the most energy. This is basically at or near maximum effort.
Maximum effort.
It's very difficult to even think at this heart rate. You're relying on unconscious execution and instinct.
Already have it. Then your body will do everything on its own. This way it will higher.
The high heart rate phase is ideal for testing if your skills work and if you developed muscle memory and they're now instinct. It also helps your body get comfortable relying on and using these skills at the highest levels of stress and intensity possible. The high heart rate phase is very difficult to maintain. You could think of this like the sort of pace you can only keep going for like 30 seconds before needing to recover. There's a whole science to explain the system of heart rate training and why it's effective, but we'll get into that later on in this video. One tip the B team recommends to be able to maintain a lower heart rate is to avoid the temptation to be overly physical and to focus on having a consistent pace to your breathing.
I've done for a long time is have a consistent pace to my breathing, and I think that's really helped with like when I'm in scrambles and stuff. Like, not some people like hold their breath when they're scrambling, or like they don't have a rhythm. I really try to always keep a steady rhythm to my breathing. That way when things get rough, I'm still like, I'm not gasping for air.
Yeah.
By focusing on your breath, you can maintain and control your heart rate.
And what is happening if you can breathe properly? You panic. What's happening if you panic? Heart rate goes up.
Yep.
Your heart rate and your breathing are correlated. Slower breathing and deeper breathing in can help calm and relax the body, which lowers the heart rate. Meanwhile, faster, uncontrolled breathing, especially breathing out, can lead to a panic response in the body, which can then lead to an increase in heart rate.
Okay, so the relationship between breathing and heart rate is an absolutely lockstep one, where your heart rate follows your breathing. Your heart rate and your breathing are in an intimate discussion with one another, but where always and forever your inhales increase your heart rate, your exhales decrease it.
Before we get into more details of the heart rate training, one thing I want to talk about that I found helpful was nasal breathing. Nasal breathing is when you breathe through your nose rather than through your mouth.
When you watch guys that are rolling in jiu-jitsu, when they start to get tired or when they get in bad positions and they begin to panic, what do? They breathe really fast, in and out through their mouth. But if you're able to breathe, and not just breathe, but within the oxygen advantage, Patrick McEwen's book, he doesn't only talk about breathing in and out through the nose, but he also talks about breathing in and out slowly through the nose. It makes a big difference in terms of lowering your heart rate, keeping you calm. And when your heart rate's lower and you're calm, guess what? You're able to think clearer. You're able to move better. You waste less energy.
This is something I became aware of when one of my coaches, Ariel Sexton, pointed out how much of a mouth breather I was.
Mouth breather.
Nasal breathing with a closed mouth whenever possible has all sorts of benefits. There's even some studies that hinted it can improve your ability to learn and remember regardless of heart rate. There also might be even more benefits to nasal breathing, like you're less likely to get sick, improved dental health, better breath, and even positive changes to facial structure.
People, and in particular children, who overuse mouth breathing as opposed to nasal breathing, have changes in the structure of the face that, well, to be quite direct, makes them far more unattractive than if they were to mouth breathe.
Over the last year, I worked really hard to turn myself into a nasal breather. To do this, I'd focus on keeping my mouth closed, focus on breathing in and out through my nose, even when doing cardio or rolling in jiu-jitsu. At higher heart rates, this eventually becomes impossible and you need to breathe in through your mouth, but I try to delay this point for as long as possible. I've even gone as far as taping my mouth shut when I'm sleeping, which I've also found really helpful to help develop this habit.
Only when we're going through our day-to-day, walking around, doing tasks, doing all the things we need to do, exercising. We not only want to breathe through our nose during that time, but we want to make sure that we're also taking advantage of the 6 to 8 hours, ideally 8 hours, that you're asleep to breathe through the nose. Mouth tape is essential. Not only will that help you breathe through your nose when you're asleep, but you'll also have better quality sleep, which will aid in better recovery, which is just leads to a massive scope of very, very, very good things. So mouth tape is beneficial.
So another thing Dima talks about with his heart rate training is that depending on what kind of grappler you are, you might be more comfortable at a low heart rate or you might be more comfortable at a higher heart rate. Dima recommends you should determine if you're a low heart rate grappler or a high heart rate grappler, and then you should actively work to force yourself outside your normal comfort zone.
Yeah, but that's the most important part. Like, there are people that have difficulties being in a low heart rate, like you guys.
Yeah.
And there are people that have difficulties being in a higher heart rate, like Nicky Rod. So we need to But that's the thing. We need to be in there in all positions, because if you find yourself in a low heart rate position where you've only been in a medium heart rate and a high heart rate, it's a different game. You learn something new, right? Even like with the base rounds, for example. You came up to me, you're like, bro, I improved today more than like, I don't know, in the past week, because you were in a low heart rate and you've never been there before.
So I think I'm definitely a low heart rate grappler, but I'm curious, and I'm sure others are as well. What about you? So we can all compare and see how we stack up. Comment below with high, medium, or low. If we were to assess some of the B team, for example, I would say that Nicky Rod and J Rod, they're both high heart rate grapplers.
For me, coming from wrestling background, everything is very fast paced, fast twitch.
Meanwhile, Nicky Ryan and Joseph Chen, I would argue, are more low heart rate grapplers. Before we get into more details on how to measure and incorporate this style of training, it's important we briefly go over the concept of heart rate zones as they're typically thought of and how they relate to Dima's system. So when people say heart rate zones, this is what they typically are speaking of. There's 6 heart rate zones. It goes from 0, which is rest, up until maximum effort, which is zone 5. Now your maximum heart rate can vary. There is a formula to estimate this based on your age. It's 220 minus your age. I've heard before that's just an estimate and it might be inaccurate. I heard another way to test is to do maximum effort workouts a few times and then get the average of that.
Your heart rate is jacked.
That being said, the numbers here are based on the typical like 35-year-old here with a maximum heart rate of 185 beats per minute. But if I had to guess, I would guess under Dima's system, the low heart rate would actually be under zone 2 on average, and maybe sometimes going into zone 3. Zone 2 isn't really that much effort at all. It's like maybe walking up a slight incline consistently or jogging at a really slow pace. I then would have to guess his medium heart rate is firmly in zone 3, probably sometimes going into zone 4. And then I would say his high heart rate would be in the higher end of zone 4 and then into zone 5. Anyway, there's a whole science to these energy systems and why you would spend different times at different zones to develop cardio and conditioning, but that's not what Dima's system's about. If you'd like to see a similar video to this in the future, focusing more on the heart rate zones for conditioning and cardio, please let me know in the comments. That all being said, there are numerous studies that say the ideal heart rate zones for learning motor skills, like in grappling, are in fact heart rate zones 2 and 3. Once you're in this heart rate, you're most engaged but not overly stressed, which is the ideal situation for learning. Once you get up into that medium heart range, which is firmly in zone 3, that effect begins to wear off. Then in zone 4 and 5, it becomes very difficult to learn as your body is under very high stress as you exert maximum effort. So there are all sorts of devices and things you can wear to measure your heart rate. I've tried a few of them, and the one I like best and the one I use now is the Whoop. This is also the same one that a few members of the B team use, including Nicky Rod and Ethan. I feel like it's usually really accurate, although sometimes, especially in the past, I feel like sometimes it would over-report numbers.
I've had the BPMs on my phone from the Whoop, and then BPM on my watch. Watch will say like 80, and my phone will say, which is the Whoop, will say like 150, 160. So it's definitely had times where it's like fuck.
One of the reasons I really like the Whoop is that you can take the sensor and you can put it in special underwear they sell, so it won't affect your training or anything. And what's really cool, after training, it usually auto detects that I trained jiu-jitsu, and then I can see what my training was like, including my heart rate. For example, here's a recent training session of mine. You know, you can see like my heart rate and you can see how much time I spent in the different zones we talked about. This heart rate monitoring can be really useful if you're following Dima's system. For example, if I was focusing on skill acquisition, I could check to keep myself honest to make sure I'm in a low heart rate. It also has a live mode so you can see your heart rate in real time. You know, one thing I thought would be cool is if you have your coach or training partner take a look at this to help keep you in your target heart rate.
Your heart rate is quite high.
We should all get Whoop straps, put a TV up, and see whose heart rate is the highest.
That's what
and then like see who's like gassing out and like. I think that'd be cool.
I worked out with Tim Kennedy a few times, and that's exactly what they do. They give us,
they put Whoop straps, and you have a TV, and you're like, oh, he's redlining, he's coasting, he's red zone.
They also have a community feature, so you can have different people in your gym or your friends in there, so you can compete and see each other's numbers. I created a jiu-jitsu Whoop community as well, so if you wear a Whoop and you're interested in joining, I put a link in the description below. We covered a lot in this video, but if you want to implement this system into your own training, here are the following steps I'd recommend. Number 1, identify what kind of style heart rate rate grappler you are. Then number 2, actively try to spend more time outside your comfort zone. For example, if you're a low heart rate grappler, try to keep moving instead of sitting in positions and try to execute your techniques at a much faster pace. And if you're a high heart rate grappler, try to slow things down, be more deliberate in the techniques you choose, and then try to beat your opponents more purely on technique rather than physicality. Now, for using this system for skill development, I think there's the following few steps. Identify what skills you want to develop and learn that make the most sense for your game, and then roll at a low heart rate so you can think about those techniques and try to execute them. Since your mind is clear as you go for these techniques, you should be able to identify what about it is working and what about it is not working. At this phase, you're going to lose a lot more than you're used to, but it'll get you better in the long run. Then as you get more comfortable with these skills, you can ramp up intensity through the medium and high heart rates, which allows you to develop the skills at a more realistic pace, but then also test them at the highest intensities. If you're a beginner, I'm not going to lie, this is going to be really difficult because you have so few skills to lean on. But one idea is to focus primarily on positional and submission escapes, since you're probably going to be in a bad position a lot already, especially if you're rolling with higher belts. Also, in my opinion, if you're further away from a competition or just in a phase of your development where you're working on skill acquisition, then it probably makes sense to focus on lower heart rate. Then ramp things up as you're getting closer to competition as you work to really sharpen those skills. If you found any of this stuff interesting, Dima also has a Patreon with a lot of great content. I'll be sure to include a link in the description below. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.